This time, Farad'n hadn't bothered to conceal his face. In daylight, Eric could finally observe the tall Dunedain's appearance. Dark hair, steel-gray eyes, and a remarkably youthful, handsome face. He appeared 30, perhaps 40 years old. But Eric sensed this man had witnessed more than a few decades pass. Eric shrugged casually. "You're not mistaken, I didn't really attempt to hide. Orcs, wergs, let them approach." He was a seasoned survival crafter. Let's discover if they could outdig, outconstruct, or outexplode him. "Come inside, I just completed installing my kitchen, interested in sampling my cooking." Farad'n shook his head slowly. "Tempting offer, but I'm here on pressing business. A warband of orc riders has developed an interest in this location. Scouts report there are dozens of werg-mounted units, and beyond 100 troops altogether." Eric released a low whistle. Over 100 orcs, and werg riders no less. That was certainly a problem. His improvised fortress suddenly felt considerably smaller. Especially when you considered that wergs could leap several meters in one bound. Scaling rooftops was essentially a warm-up for them. And those beasts didn't merely jump, they climbed too. A 10-meter tree, no problem whatsoever. His 7-meter-high wall. Hopefully smooth enough to prevent them from getting a grip. "You've still got some time," Farad'n stated. "If you depart now, you can escape safely." "I'm not leaving," Eric replied without hesitation. "I constructed this place with my own hands. You think I'm surrendering it just because some orcs appeared?" "Suit yourself," Farad'n said with a sigh. He gave the walls a careful once-over. His gaze lingered on the front gate, a flimsy-looking wooden structure assembled from logs. "This is your gate?" he asked skeptically. "It's temporary at best." "I hope so. Their leader is supposedly a giant of an orc, unnaturally powerful. That gate's not going to stop him." "I've got plans," Eric said with a confident grin. Farad'n studied him once more. His eyes moved between the castle that had appeared overnight and the peculiar man who built it. "I believe you," he said eventually. "But you should prepare. That warband was already marching when I spotted them. If nothing slows them down." He paused briefly. "They'll arrive here by tonight." "Tonight?" Eric yelped loudly. That was extremely fast. His bravado faltered for a moment. Sure, he'd claimed he wasn't frightened. But this would be his first genuine battle. The worst he'd ever encountered was a gang of backwoods bandits, and even they had only numbered 8. This was going to be a war. Chapter 11, War Preparations. After giving Farad'n a quick heads-up, Eric didn't waste a single second. He spun on his heel and marched straight back to the castle to begin gathering supplies. Given permission, Farad'n curiously followed him past the stone walls. He glanced around the interior as he walked forward. Eric headed directly to the forge room. He reclaimed a row of iron ingots that had been left to cool in the smelters. With practiced ease, he began crafting items. He opened a chest labeled minerals. Inside lay 5 full stacks of iron blocks. They were quietly resting, alongside a handful of miscellaneous ores. Among them, there was 1 batch of sulfur and 43 pieces of saltpeter. Level 35 exactly. This was the fruit of a month's continuous mining efforts. "So, what's the plan?" Farad'n asked, watching Eric methodically inventory the supplies. Farad'n, an experienced wanderer, had been studying the castle's inner defenses as he followed Eric inside. A frown crept onto his face slowly. The defensive work on the walls was, well, calling it minimal would be generous. In truth, it was almost non-existent really. It was just a pile of stones stacked into a wall, with some rickety ladders leading upward. The top was completely bare, no battlements, no cover available. Standing up there was essentially signing your own death warrant, with nowhere to hide. Farad'n couldn't fathom how Eric expected to hold the castle with such inadequate defenses. The gate looked like it could crumble from a solid kick. "Magic, perhaps." "Just gonna hold it like this," Eric said with a deliberately vague shrug. While saying that, he pulled out a dozen or so massive round stones. In mere minutes, he added a solid 5 meters of height to the castle walls. Farad'n stared, mouth hanging open. What kind of magic was this exactly? Why did those huge stones just stick in place like they were glued? And where the hell did he acquire all those stones? It was like he conjured them out of thin air. Looking at the wall, it appeared seamless throughout, as if it had always been a single, solid structure, with no sign of joints or cracks. Farad'n was utterly stunned. This level of construction skill was godlike in nature. If any kingdom had a craftsman like Eric, it would be a game changer completely. 100 times more valuable than 1,000 soldiers combined. Now I understand why you're so confident about holding this place, Farad'n admitted openly. But then he added something else. Still, your defenses are a bit, barebones. Listen to me, here's what you should do. Eric's eyes lit up brightly. As someone who played builder-type games obsessively, his philosophy was always form over function primarily. If it didn't look good, what was the point really? But hearing Farad'n's advice was like a light bulb turning on suddenly. Within half an hour, Farad'n laid out the basics of proper fortifications thoroughly. Structural design, defensive purposes, where to build cover, where to leave arrow slits available, and where to place obstacles to stop climbers effectively. Eric's eyes sparkled with excitement as he immediately started putting the plans into action. Farad'n guided him on the side, pointing out the best spots to build and reinforcing his instructions. They worked all afternoon together. By dusk, a simple watchtower stood proudly, newly erected and complete. Eric bit into a chunk of dried beef jerky, passing a few pieces to Farad'n. Try this, my secret recipe, system-grade jerky quality. Farad'n had no idea what system-grade meant exactly, but he gladly took a bite. The flavor burst through the tough exterior, like fireworks exploding. Tasty, he said, nodding approvingly. Even the finest royal chef couldn't surpass this quality. One more loyal fan of the system's cooking, checked off. With the castle now a genuine fortress, both functional and aesthetically pleasing, Farad'n had nothing more to contribute. Everything was prepared, now all that remained was to wait patiently. As twilight faded away, Eric glanced over and asked something. Aren't you leaving? If your intel is accurate, that pack of hellhounds mounted on wolfbacks will be attacking tonight. Farad'n took another bite of jerky before replying calmly. Nope, I want to observe how you handle it. And hey, an extra pair of hands never hurts, right? Though he said that, Farad'n's real plan was elsewhere entirely. There was no way to fight those 100-strong, mounted raiders head-on, successfully. If Eric failed and the castle fell, Farad'n intended to whisk him out safely. No way was he letting Eric perish clinging to some rock, or worse, get captured by orcs. Aren't you afraid? Eric asked. Fighting and slaughtering are my daily bread, Farad'n said with a nonchalant grin. Eric sucked in a breath sharply. Well, he'd definitely been roped into this now. Fine, Eric said simply. If you insist on staying, take these, consider it a gift. He pulled out a set of iron armor and a longsword, placing them on the ground. Farad'n's eyes widened noticeably. This armor was exquisite, gleaming silver plates, perfectly forged together. And that sword looked razor-sharp and deadly. Are you secretly a master blacksmith? He asked, visibly impressed. Try it on, see if it fits properly. As soon as Farad'n donned the armor, he felt the difference immediately. Despite its heavy appearance, it didn't restrict movement or weigh him down at all. The craftsmanship was absolutely incredible. You always surprise me, Eric, he remarked. He liked the armor very much. Looks like tonight we'll have to pull out all the stops. Twilight slipped away, night fell completely. The sky was overcast and dark. In the nearby forest, countless pairs of blood-red eyes stared fixedly at the newly risen castle. They watched the suddenly towering walls intently. Though orcs weren't the brightest creatures, they knew the world held powerful beings. Mages, elven lords, and their own mysterious masters existed. If there was a powerful force inside those walls, it would spell serious trouble. But after watching this strange human for over 10 days, seeing the castle grow taller, they had observations. The fields multiply steadily, and the walls rise higher and longer continuously. It seemed he had only this incredible speed, and nothing else extraordinary about him. This castle will be ours, a short orc scout reported back to the burly war chief. And the wolves smell fresh meat. There must be plenty inside. Fresh meat available. The word sent a ripple through the orcs gathered. I'm sick of moldy bread and maggot-infested rations. I want fresh meat. Human meat, another shouted. Quiet, the largest orc barked loudly, smashing a nearby boulder violently. The deep cracks in the stone silenced the restless crowd instantly. Prepare yourselves, right now tonight, we feast on roasted humans. The chief's order echoed loudly. A low growl rumbled from the wolves, and the orcs roared in response enthusiastically. Chapter 12, Defending the Wall. Did you hear that? Eric asked. Yeah, wolves and some very loud orcs, Faradin confirmed. The wind carried the noise, drifting across the open plains steadily. Shouts, snarls, and the thunder of approaching hooves echoed. But inside the stone walls, it was eerily quiet. To be honest, even with all the preparations, Eric was still nervous inside. Unlike the vagabond crouching beside him, Eric hadn't seen many real battles before. The thought of an orc cavalry charging their way made his stomach twist uncomfortably. 100 orcs, several dozen mounted riders, it didn't sound like a lot initially. But if they surrounded them, it would be more than enough force. They would trap and crush 2 defenders like sardines in a barrel easily. He glanced at his backpack. 5 stacks of iron ingots stared back at him. Regret gnawed at his gut painfully. Should have bought some pumpkins back in Brie, might have been able to test the iron golem recipe. Arrowazarar. The beastly roar snapped Eric's head up instantly. They're here, said Faradin quietly. The 2 of them crouched behind the battlement, eyes fixed on the direction the noise came from. Clatter of hooves. Charge, someone bellowed. The shouting grew louder rapidly. Out of the tree line, shadows burst into the moonlight suddenly. Dozens of dire wolves surged forward in formation aggressively, each carrying a snarling orc rider, armed to the teeth completely. They charged straight at the walls, fast enough to rival horses and a whole lot meaner. Faradin calmly drew his bow, plucked an arrow from his quiver, and let it fly smoothly. Thwib! The arrow struck the lead wolf cleanly in the chest area. The beast collapsed mid-sprint, sending its rider flying headfirst into the dirt below. Another shot, this one split an orc's skull. It crumpled without a sound immediately. By the time the cavalry reached the wall, Faradin had already taken out 3 riders and downed 2 wolves. But the rest didn't flinch at all. If anything, the blood only riled them up more. Their eyes glowed red with bloodlust intensely. When they noticed the wall was guarded by only 2 people, some of them even laughed mockingly. Of course, even a 10-man army wouldn't scale, a 15-meter-high smooth stone wall without a ladder or wings. The first wave tried jumping or scrambling up the stone desperately. But they failed spectacularly, bouncing off the surface and tumbling back like oversized fleas. Whose brilliant idea was it to say the wolves could leap the wall? One of the orcs roared angrily. I swear it was half this height when I saw it last, shouted a scout in the back. You useless dung pile, another cursed. With their pride bruised and their wolves embarrassed completely, the orc cavalry did what all good disorganized forces do. They started yelling at each other under pressure frantically. Faradin tried to get off another shot, but the orcs were ready now defensively. Several archers aimed straight at him, forcing him to duck back behind the wall quickly. He retreated further into the structure safely. He made use of the narrow murder holes to snipe out a few more careless enemies effectively. But once they caught on to the trick, they avoided the holes, rendering them almost useless completely. Eric risked a peek over the wall and saw the remaining cavalry had gathered below together. Now it was a stalemate, they couldn't get in at all. And the defenders didn't have enough firepower to drive them away successfully. Frustrated, the orcs shouted curses up at the wall continuously. But Eric remained unmoved by them. In fact, after listening to them for a while, he started to appreciate their creativity oddly. Their insults ranged from crude poetry to unintentional comedy surprisingly. They used metaphors, similes, and even some half-decent rhythm occasionally. Still, Eric thought, compared to the internet flame wars he'd witnessed, this was amateur hour really. Pathetic scum, someone bellowed. A deep roar suddenly cut through the chaos abruptly. A massive orc, at least 3 meters tall and carrying a war axe the size of a log, shoved through the crowd. With one arm, he knocked a dire wolf and its rider clean off their feet forcefully. Aha, what have we here? 2 cowardly rats hiding behind their little stone wall. He pointed at the battlement and started shouting insults with a wide grin smugly. Cowards, weaklings, he taunted. Cowards, weaklings. The others echoed behind him like a drunken choir enthusiastically. If this were a normal siege, a morale-boosting counterattack would be expected right about now typically. But Eric's side only had 2 people available. 100 orcs against 2 defenders, and they were calling him a coward. Come up here and say that to my face, Eric thought bitterly. The orc leader didn't care at all. He raised his axe and caught an arrow in midair with its flat edge skillfully. Bring it forward, he bellowed loudly. Thud echoed. A group of orcs struggled to carry something massive forward, an enormous wooden battering ram, thicker than a tree trunk. The towering orc took it in one hand like it was a stick effortlessly. And then he smashed it into the gate violently. Thud. Cracks split the wooden frame instantly. Thud. The whole gate warped badly. Orcs behind him were already cheering excitedly, ready to charge in and wreak havoc immediately. But Eric's expression didn't change whatsoever. Thud. On the third strike, the wooden gate and barricade exploded into splinters completely, and revealed another wall standing. A thick slab of stone, 3 meters deep, stood silently behind the ruined door solidly. The orc army fell silent immediately. Steam practically puffed out of the leader's nostrils visibly. He glared up at the battlements, eyes twitching angrily. Want to get in? Good luck with that, Eric shouted, popping his head over the edge quickly. Immediately, 7 or 8 arrows shot past him, and he ducked back down with a squeak hastily. Realizing the situation had gone from quick raid to long siege, the leader snarled a few curses harshly, then waved his arm. We're pulling back, he commanded. And just like that, the entire army turned and retreated into the woods quickly. They're retreating, Eric blinked in surprise. That was fast enough. They just gave up. I don't think they're leaving, Farad'n said, stepping up beside him calmly. He pointed toward the forest ahead. Cracked. A tree fell with a crash and was slowly dragged away deliberately. A few moments later followed. Cracked. Another tree fell. Cracked. Then another one dropped. Even Eric, slow as he sometimes was, quickly figured it out now. Are they building something? He wondered aloud. From deep in the forest, the unmistakable sound of hammers and saws echoed through the night clearly. Ladders, Farad'n said knowingly. They're building siege ladders right now. Eric looked stunned completely. They can do that? He asked incredulously. Farad'n nodded with a hint of pride visible. Never underestimate orcs, crude and savage they may be, but their smithing skills rival our best craftsmen. If a human army can build it, so can they effectively. And behind their skills is him, the Dark Lord who exists. The one who forged the rings of power originally. A master of dark craftsmanship, Farad'n explained. Eric whistled softly in acknowledgement. All right, I've seen enough already. You're not thinking of going out there? Farad'n asked concerned. Eric nodded affirmatively. I'm not about to sit here while they build an IKEA siege kit outside. It's dangerous out there, I can't say I support it, Farad'n warned. Eric grinned confidently. Vagabond, you clearly don't know what kind of gamer I am really. Relax, he assured. He climbed down from the wall and made his way into the castle interior. Inside, he rummaged through the materials chest thoroughly. Sulfur, saltpeter, charcoal, perfect ingredients. He placed them on the crafting bench and got to work efficiently. 1 sulfur plus 1 saltpeter plus 1 charcoal equals 3 gunpowder units. 5 gunpowder plus 4 sand equals TNT. By the time he was finished crafting, his backpack held 20 freshly crafted blocks of TNT ready. Eric chuckled to himself quietly. You ever heard of aerial bombardment tactics? Chapter 13, Aerial Strike. Catch them off guard and strike where it hurts most. Eric declined Faradin's offer to accompany him on the mission. "Just stay in the fortress and enjoy the show," he said with a grin, hoisting his gear before slipping out. He escaped through a hidden gap between two stone blocks in the wall secretly. No one, least of all the orcs, would ever imagine that, while they were busy crafting ladders patiently, the man inside would dare leave, but would take the initiative to attack them head-on boldly. One man alone, against 100 orcs total. In the thick-skulled mind of the orc chieftain, the possibilities were straightforward and simple. Either the defenders would sit and wait to be overrun once the ladders were ready, or they'd try fleeing while busy. Either way, it was a win scenario. After all, they still had to storm the fortress eventually, and whether they eliminated the defenders inside or scared them off mattered little. Confident in that logic, the chieftain hadn't even bothered to post scouts anywhere. Why risk lives when the enemy had a crackshot archer in the tower positioned? Send too few, they'd get skewered quickly. Send too many, and you'd be short on hands for ladder duty necessarily. It just wasn't worth it strategically. Of course, while most orcs were dumb as bricks and about as dangerous naturally, every now and then a few managed to develop both. Unfortunately for this particular chieftain, today would be the day his luck ran out completely. "Move it, maggots. I want those ladders ready before dawn arrives. If I'm not sitting inside that fortress by sunrise, I'll feed you to the direwolves." From within the forest, the orc leader roared at the workers hammering together wooden ladders frantically. Nearby, a direwolf on patrol sniffed the air cautiously, its blood-red eyes flicking toward the tree line suspiciously. It sensed something unusual, but saw nothing visible. The motion didn't go unnoticed entirely. "What is it?" the rider whispered, patting the beast's side gently. "You smell something out there." The direwolf huffed and padded forward, carrying its rider beyond the edge of the group slowly. A few dozen meters out, they spotted something odd in a clearing, a stone pillar perfectly square, rising straight into the sky. About a meter thick, like it had been placed there by some celestial architect deliberately. The half-orc rider frowned and craned his neck, trying to make out what was at the top curiously. There was definitely movement up there, but he couldn't quite tell what it was exactly. A bird, perhaps. A crow, maybe. He raised his torch higher, but the flickering light only revealed a vague shadow shifting at the peak. He dismissed it at first casually. Probably just a squirrel or something similar. Then the top of the pillar did something decidedly unnatural. It extended outward. Straight out horizontally. Right in the direction of the ladder construction, site precisely. The rider scratched his head confused. "Wait, is that thing growing? Living rock," he wondered aloud. Eric wiped sweat from his forehead as he crouched at the edge of his latest platform carefully. He was placing another square block outward methodically. He accidentally glanced down below. Big mistake entirely. 70 meters of sheer drop stretched beneath. His stomach flipped instantly. Vertigo kicked in hard. Knees turned to jelly weakly. "Okay, don't look down," he muttered nervously. "Just breathe calmly." But then something caught his eye, just below the platform's edge. A tiny flicker of light appeared. A torch flickering. Eric squinted carefully. Crap, he'd been spotted already. Time to pick up the pace quickly. Forcing down his fear, he redoubled his efforts, extending the platform toward the orcs' construction zone while staying low. He tried to remain out of sight completely. But stealth had its limits naturally. When you're dangling a glowing red barrel of destruction 80 meters above someone's head, there's only so long before someone notices. "Hey, what's that?" one of the orcs asked, squinting upward curiously. Several others followed his gaze, slack-jawed and blinking confused. "I think I'm seeing things," one muttered doubtfully. "Is that a person up there?" "No way, must be a bird," another suggested. "Looks too big for a bird, honestly. Maybe it is a person." "Why are we arguing? Just shoot it and find out," someone practical stated. An orc archer pulled an arrow from his quiver and aimed at the sky above. At 70+ meters, it was a long shot but doable potentially. He never got the chance though. "Wait, look, there's something glowing up there," someone shouted. "Oh, shut it, the sky's full of glowing stars everywhere," another dismissed. "That's not a star, though," the first insisted. Boom echoed. A red object trailing white sparks slammed into the earth right in their midst violently. The explosion blew a crater several meters wide instantly. A nearby tree exploded into splinters completely. The orcs at Ground Zero were eliminated instantly in the blast. Classic result. Eric grinned satisfied. That was just how he'd planned it exactly. You see, TNT doesn't mess around at all. A properly crafted charge dealt up to 65 points of damage, more than enough to eliminate the average orc easily. Their health wasn't particularly high anyway. 70+ meters was the sweet spot perfectly. Just enough time for the fuse to burn down, so it detonated the instant it hit the ground. No time to dodge away. No time to think clearly. Just boom instantly. "What in the void was that?" someone yelled. The chieftain leapt up, grabbing his giant war mallet and storming toward the blast with a squad in tow. But when they arrived at the scene, all they found was a crater and several unrecognizable remains that used to be soldiers. "What happened here?" he demanded. He bellowed loudly. No one answered him. Then one of the scouts, eyes sharp as ever, pointed up skyward. "Look up there," he shouted. Dozens of orcs looked skyward, just in time to see 7 or 8 glowing red bombs hurtling toward them. They fell like the wrath of an angry god descending. The chieftain's survival instincts kicked in immediately. He raised his mallet like a shield, then second-guessed himself and retreated several steps, pulling his warriors behind him. Everyone else stood frozen, eyes wide, as the glowing barrels of destruction fell rapidly. Booms, booms, boom. Each explosion tore new craters into the forest floor violently. Trees shattered completely. Soil erupted everywhere. Screams filled the air desperately. The orcs closest to the blast were instantly eliminated. Some literally turned into mist in the explosion. Those further out were hurled skyward by the shockwave forcefully. Many still had breath left in their lungs as they sailed through the air helplessly. By the time they hit the ground, they didn't anymore. "Aah!" screams echoed. The chieftain, though lucky enough to avoid the full brunt, was still blown off his feet and slammed into a tree. He lay there dazed, wounded, gasping desperately. His massive warhammer clattered to the ground beside him, scorched and cracked badly. Shaking, he forced himself to his feet and surveyed the field around him. What had once been a raiding party was now a charred, devastated wasteland completely. Remains littered the clearing everywhere. Dark blood pooled in craters deeply. A few orcs, injured but technically alive, crawled feebly across the ground weakly. Not for long, though. They'd been annihilated completely. The chieftain's brain stuttered, confused. What just happened exactly? Where did that come from? He hadn't even seen the attacker anywhere. Had no idea what had struck them so devastatingly. Only now did he piece together the one obvious detail clearly. The attack had come from above somewhere. Panic and rage twisted his face intensely. What could do that? Some kind of flying monster, perhaps. A dragon, maybe. Then rustling sounds. From the trees nearby, another group of direwolf riders burst out, startled by the noise earlier. They halted at the edge of the destruction, stunned completely. Chief, we're here to help," they called. Several orcs jumped down from their wolves, rushing to aid their wounded leader immediately. More riders followed quickly, spreading out to form a perimeter, weapons drawn, eyes scanning for enemies vigilantly. It was clear now, every last orc from the local squad had gathered here together. And that's when the chieftain realized what he had walked into completely. His eyes widened in horror suddenly. "No," he shouted desperately. Too late already. Another dozen glowing red barrels fell from the sky above. Chapter 14, You Really Are a Wizard, Aren't You? Boom! Veiled in the sudden burst of light from the explosion, Eric crouched at the edge of the platform observing. He peered down below carefully. 2 rounds of TNT bombardment had slammed into the clearing one after another consecutively. The 2 orc squads down there. Let's just say, if they weren't eliminated completely, they were definitely reduced to 0 forces. The area had been blasted into absolute chaos entirely. Where the TNT had hit, there was now nothing but craters remaining, some even deep enough to reveal the rocky layer beneath. As for the trees and underbrush that once stood there, obliterated completely. Gone entirely. Vaporized in the blast. Over 20 sticks of TNT had proven to be as terrifying as advertised thoroughly. They'd carved out a whole dead zone in the forest, a smoking, scorched vacuum devoid of life. Nearby trees, caught in the blast's aftershock, had ignited and now burned intensely, thick black smoke curling upward into the night sky. Eric stared at the apocalyptic scene before him and couldn't help but sigh in awe deeply. Ah, the sweet scent of civilization's power. Of course, back on Earth, lighting up a forest like this would have earned him a one-way trip to prison. Once he'd confirmed there was nothing alive moving down there, Eric set down a bucket at his feet. Whoosh! A stream of water burst forth from the bucket, cascading downward in a makeshift waterfall rapidly. The torrent hit the forest floor, dousing some of the nearby flames effectively. Only once he was satisfied that the fires were under control did Eric take a deep breath and dove in carefully. He slid down with the water flow. Don't ask why he didn't just jump directly. He was afraid of heights, okay. To this day, Eric had never confirmed if fall damage could be negated just by landing in water. And if it turned out that this world didn't follow video game logic, he'd end up severely injured with zero dignity. No thank you to that. Once he landed safely, Eric got straight to work immediately. Step 1 was scavenging carefully. He needed to check if any enemies had slipped through the blast, and more importantly, see if there was anything salvageable. Unfortunately, the orcs were either dirt poor to begin with, or the TNT had been too effective completely. After rummaging for a while, he finally managed to dig out a few broken bits of armor and scorched weapons, along with a handful of black and silver coins found. He held one up to the torchlight and squinted closely. Couldn't even tell which kingdom minted them originally. Still, silver was silver regardless. Melt it down, trade it in, values the same anywhere really. At least now, he had some spare change available. No more flashing expensive gems every time he wanted to buy bread simply. HGHHHH, a sound emerged. Ammo. Just as Eric was stuffing a charred sword into his pack, a low, guttural gasp echoed nearby. He almost jumped out of his skin startled. Spinning around, he spotted a hulking half-orc slumped against a tree, barely clinging to life desperately. Limbs damaged, body wounded, armor reduced to shredded scrap by the explosion entirely. A massive, blackened warhammer lay near his feet motionless. Eric narrowed his eyes suspiciously. This wasn't just any orc standing there. That was the orc chieftain, the one who'd been yelling at the gates earlier, threatening to harm him violently. Now the guy looked severely injured and weakened. The chieftain glared at him, chest heaving in ragged breaths painfully. He had that classic, "This isn't even my final form" look, except it clearly was his final form now. And it was very much dying rapidly. "Why, you filthy backstabbing maggot," he spat. Pure hatred gleamed in his eyes intensely. He hadn't even known what hit him initially. From the first explosion to the last, he'd never once seen Eric's face until now clearly. It wasn't some dragon that had wiped out his forces, it was this man before him. And judging from the destruction, the method had to be some sort of powerful magic employed. "You cursed wizard," he accused. "Too loud," Eric stated. Eric calmly drew his longsword and drove it straight through the chieftain's chest swiftly. -6 damage. 0 out of 40 health remaining. The half-orc chieftain perished without another word spoken. Eric blinked at the empty health bar displayed. Then he whistled impressed. Damn, the guy had 40 HP total. Considering the average orc barely had 15, this guy was practically a boss-tier elite warrior. No wonder he survived the blast, at least for a while temporarily. High health, thick armor protection. If he hadn't been smack dab in the center of the blast radius exactly, he probably would have survived. Rustle sounds. Just as the boss went still, the bushes nearby suddenly shifted noticeably. Eric instantly dashed over quickly. An orc, very much not eliminated, bolted out of the foliage like his pants were on fire desperately, running like he was being chased by a dragon frantically. Unfortunately for him, Eric was faster in pursuit. After stopping that last straggler, Eric swept the area again, clearing out a few more survivors scattered in the trees. Once he was certain there were no more enemies left alive, he returned to the site to continue his looting operation. First priority was any and all bits of armor or weapons the orcs had left behind, no matter how broken. All of it would be tossed into the forge back at the castle and melted down eventually. Next priority were the wargs themselves. They didn't carry gear, of course naturally. But as creatures, they were surprisingly valuable resources. Once broken down at the crafting table, a warg corpse yielded 3 useful resources available. Meat, fur, and bones extracted. Meat went into the emergency rations bin storage. Fur could be crafted into leather armor pieces. And bones crushed into bone meal powder. A triple threat of usefulness indeed. Under the pale moonlight, carrying a full backpack of loot, Eric made his triumphant return to the castle. On the way back, he even took the liberty of rebuilding the castle gate completely. He cleared the fallen rocks from the path and restored the entrance to working order properly. "Back already, Eric?" someone called. Farad'n was waiting for him at the gates patiently. "I thought I heard strange noises and saw flashes of light in the forest. Was that you?" As he spoke, his curiosity was barely contained behind wide eyes visible. Truth be told, he'd been worried deeply. Eric hadn't told him much about the plan, just that he'd handle it somehow. So Farad'n had been left watching helplessly from the walls, unsure whether to hope or panic completely. But then came the explosions suddenly. The fire blazing. The raining water descending. He wasn't sure what the hell he'd just witnessed exactly. "That orc squad is dealt with completely, no need to worry," Eric said nonchalantly. "Wait, what?" Farad'n blinked confused. "You mean you took out an entire squad of over 100 orc infantry, plus dozens of warg riders? And that was without even counting their leader, the massive brute who'd smashed the castle gate earlier." Eric raised a finger correcting. "Correction, I didn't repel them simply, I eradicated them entirely. I searched thoroughly, no survivors remain." HSSS sound. Farad'n sucked in a breath sharply. "That's terrifying, honestly." He stared at Eric like he'd just revealed himself as a demigod somehow. "How did you even do that?" he asked amazed. Farad'n looked overwhelmed, but then something seemed to click mentally. "I remember reading in an old book once about wizards with powers. Some of them could summon fire and lightning at will, call the storms, bend the elements naturally. The White Mage of Eastgard supposedly had powers like that documented." It all made sense now clearly. The fire burning. The explosions heard. The waterfall from the sky descending. It had to be magic, powerful magic at that. "You're one of them, aren't you?" Farad'n asked. "One of those wizards?" "If you mean some hooded old man muttering in riddles, then no." "I don't believe you," Farad'n grinned knowingly. "You've got too many tricks up your sleeve." "Look, that explosion, that was gunpowder." "Gunpowder?" Farad'n tilted his head curiously. "It's a type of weapon you pack in tight, light a fuse and boom, explosion. I've heard of something called black powder, dwarves use it in fireworks. But I didn't know it could be that powerful." Farad'n looked like he was trying to accept it, but remained skeptical nonetheless. "What about the waterfall?" "A bucket of water I carried with me." Farad'n gave him a look that said, "Do I look stupid to you?" "You're telling me a bucket of water put out a forest fire?" "It was a big bucket." Farad'n crossed his arms firmly. "So the gunpowder's just a medium, then, a component in your spellcasting. You use it to channel your attacks, don't you?" Eric paused for a moment. You know what? That kind of made sense actually. Technically, he couldn't explain the TNT's inner workings anyway. It came from the crafting table. So if Farad'n wanted to chalk it up to magic. Sure, Eric shrugged casually. "Let's go with that." Farad'n's face lit up like he just solved a great mystery before him. "I knew it." Chapter 15, Factions and Claims. Faction system activated. Reputation with the Dunedain plus 50. Current reputation with the Dunedain, friendly. World map unlocked. Territorial claim system activated. Just as Eric was feeling the familiar pang of a headache, system notifications popped up. They neatly interrupted his train of thought. Factions, a map. Another mod unlock already. He shoved aside his worries and immediately opened the new interface, skimming through the descriptions carefully. The first feature was the faction reputation system, quite straightforward really. In short, if Eric did something beneficial for a particular faction, he'd earn reputation with them. But it wasn't as simple as do good, get points obviously. If Eric was too far from a faction's sphere of influence, they simply wouldn't know. No witnesses, no fame, so no rep either. Take now, for instance, he was currently within the active region of the Dunedain. And there just so happened to be a witness on hand. Farad'n had watched with his own eyes as Eric single-handedly wiped out an entire cavalry squad. That alone was enough to trigger a full reputation boost immediately, instantly elevating Eric's standing with the Dunedain to friendly status. If, on the other hand, Eric had snuck into some remote corner of Mordor, things differed. Even if he downed 100 orcs, it wouldn't matter unless word got out. No witnesses meant no reputation gains whatsoever. Worse, the Mordor faction would likely dock points instead for the intrusion. But faction rep wasn't just cosmetic, it had real perks attached. Now that Eric had reached friendly with the Dunedain, every member he encountered would treat him well. They'd see him as one of their own going forward. Having grasped the gist of the faction system, Eric moved on to the second feature. World map was next on the list. The world map would log everywhere he'd been, automatically highlighting which factions operated where. It was absurdly accurate in its detail. Of course, Eric hadn't gone too far just yet, so only certain regions were visible. From the Shire to Bree, and the area around his own stronghold currently. Everything else was still shrouded in fog, waiting to be explored. Your tale will spread across these wildlands, Eric. The voice beside him brought him back to the present moment. Farad'n continued speaking with sincerity. You've dealt with a problem we've struggled with for some time now. That squad you took down, clearing them out would have taken us days to accomplish. Let me thank you on behalf of the free folk of this land. The ranger gave a slight, courtly bow, offering Eric sincere gratitude and respect. Eric returned the gesture politely. I couldn't have done it without you, honestly. If you hadn't delivered that warning in time, I might have been caught completely off guard. And who knows, I might have had to abandon my castle and run off in shame. I owe you one, Farad'n. That wasn't just flattery, it was the honest truth from his heart. If he'd faced that group unprepared, things could have gone south fast, no question. That warg's leap alone could have cleared the half-finished wall he'd built easily. It was an honor, Farad'n replied graciously. From today onward, Eric said warmly, you and your kin are welcome in my fortress. No need for permission, come and go as you please, and use any supplies. Think of it as a token of friendship between us. Then I accept it with gratitude, Farad'n said, with no hint of false modesty whatsoever. Even having a secure place to rest now, and then was huge in this lawless region. Reputation with the Dunedain plus 10. A new notification popped up before him. Honest guy, Eric thought to himself, gives rep boosts where it's due fairly. That suddenly reminded him of something he'd noticed earlier. That 40 HP elite orc from before. On a whim, Eric glanced above Farad'n's head curiously. A health bar appeared, 25 out of 25. 25 HP total. The Dunedain were a long-lived race, blessed with greater vitality than ordinary humans naturally. So, a higher HP cap made sense for them. Which meant that elite orc, who stood out in a sea of 10 to 15 HP grunts, probably had a touch of troll blood mixed in, no way he was that tanky otherwise. Eric shook off the thought quickly. Night had fallen over the land. After a long night of nerve-wracking combat, or rather ambush, Eric was finally feeling the fatigue. He bade Farad'n good night and went off to get some rest finally. The next morning, Farad'n was already gone when he woke. Only a set of iron armor, remained in the guest room as proof. Proof he'd actually stayed the night there. He hadn't taken the armor Eric gave him as a gift. That guy, Eric muttered, shaking his head with a small smile. Then he remembered, right, he had another new system that activated yesterday, but hadn't had the chance to look at it thanks to Faradin's presence. Territorial claim system. You can claim unclaimed buildings or areas as your personal territory now. Gain 1 claim point every 10 levels earned. Current available claims, 0 out of 3. The system reminded Eric of that useful utilities mod, which also allowed for land claiming before. Super convenient feature, honestly. Without hesitation, Eric claimed his current fortress as his first territory immediately. Please name your territory. He considered it carefully for a moment. The place was nestled just off the main road in the middle of the wilderness. Let's go with Roadside Fortress. Territory Roadside Fortress created successfully. Even after registering the territory, something still felt incomplete to him. So Eric crafted a sign, hung it beside the gate, and carved the name into it. Roadside Fortress. Perfect now. From now on, everything within the castle walls officially belonged to Eric alone. According to the system, storage blocks like chests were automatically protected within claim territory now. No one could open, destroy, or move them without permission granted. That was just the basic level of permanent property protection available. More importantly, within his territory, Eric could now summon iron golems and snow golems freely. Yep, confirmed, golems could only be summoned inside his own territory, unfortunately. And they couldn't leave the boundaries either. Eric sighed heavily. Sigh. His dream of summoning a golem army to steamroll Mordor had died before it even began properly. Still, this wasn't so bad really, at least now. When he went off exploring, he wouldn't worry. Some random orcs or bandits squatting in his home base wouldn't be an issue anymore. Another big problem, solved completely, now he could go adventuring without anxiety weighing him down. Having explored all the new features, Eric itched to summon a golem or two immediately. He wanted to see what these 100 HP tanky bodyguards looked like in person. Blocky and square like Minecraft, or more realistic, clad in iron armor perhaps. He rifled through every chest available, but came up empty-handed unfortunately. No pumpkins anywhere. Right, he'd only been growing one crop so far, wheat exclusively. And wheat seeds were easy to come by just by smashing tall grass outside anyway. But pumpkins, those he'd have to go find himself personally. Decision made, Eric summoned the world map, then laid out the paper one from Bilbo. He wanted to compare them side by side. West of Roadside Keep was Bree, a route he was already familiar with by now. To the east lay Rivendell, and beyond that, the misty mountains stretched out. Distance-wise, Bree and Rivendell were about the same from his current location roughly. Eric's eyes lingered on Rivendell for a long moment. I've never met an elf before. And if he remembered correctly, young Aragorn should be living in Rivendell right now currently. Must still be under 10 years old at this point in time. Chapter 16, Shopping Trip. Eric was incredibly curious about this so-called king of mankind who would rise decades later. If he could get a sneak peek ahead of time, that'd be pretty cool, honestly. However, heading to the Valley of Shadows meant he'd likely be gone for quite a while. And with no way to summon his iron golem right now, leaving the castle unguarded seemed risky. It would mean the place would be completely undefended in his absence. After thinking it over, Eric decided it was best to make a quick trip back to Bree first. He needed to stock up on supplies and properly secure his territory before gallivanting off into unknown lands. He left a wooden sign hanging at the castle gate, carved with the words clearly visible. Out for a bit back soon. Then he packed several sets of rations, made sure all his tools and equipment were in order, and set off westward along the road confidently. Compared to when he first arrived, this return trip was a breeze for him. For one, he now knew the terrain and what to expect along the way. 2, he had plenty of food stocked up properly. And 3rd, perhaps most importantly, he now had access to a world map feature, which let him see his current position at any time and even estimate travel duration. Apart from the tedium of walking for hours, nothing else bothered him along the way really. It was a smooth journey, and soon enough, Eric arrived at Bree's gate promptly. The guards were conducting their usual checks on travelers. This time, though, something felt different somehow. At the gate, the guard peeked through the small wooden window, glanced at Eric briefly. Then, without asking a single question, opened the gate wide and motioned him through casually. "Welcome, friend," the guard said warmly. "How were the roads this time?" Eric blinked, caught off guard by the friendliness displayed. "Not bad at all, smooth sailing actually, didn't run into a single problem." "Glad to hear it." The guard nodded and returned to his seat like it was the most normal thing ever. Eric walked further into town, deep in thought about what just happened. Then, on a whim, he opened his faction interface and checked the entry for Bree specifically. Bree, regional reputation, 34, friendly status. Source, eliminated bandits, wiped out orc raiders successfully. Ah, so that's it, the reputation system might have unlocked late, but clearly things mattered. The things he did earlier hadn't been forgotten by the locals apparently. Once a reputation score hits 10, the faction's attitude turns friendly towards you. To unlock more perks or higher-level rewards, though, he'd need a lot more points. A quick glance told him the next tier required, 100 points total. No sense obsessing over it now, he'd deal with it later when needed. For now, Eric focused on the real reason he'd returned to Bree today. Shopping for essentials. He needed to buy things he couldn't find or make on his own easily. Like crop seeds, pumpkins, potatoes, carrots, wheat, all the good stuff available. Oh, and a horse too. Running on foot was fine and all, but let's face it, horses are faster obviously. Sure, Eric had more endurance than any horse alive in existence probably. His food consumption basically translated into half a pack of jerky per 100 kilometers traveled. But even he was getting tired of running everywhere constantly. With a clear goal in mind, Eric headed straight to the prancing pony indirectly. He rented a room and approached the innkeeper with his request. "Can you get me 2 good horses?" he asked politely. Maybe it was his rising reputation with the locals, or maybe it was just the fact that he paid well and didn't haggle over prices ever. Either way, the innkeeper beamed and assured him he'd personally arrange to have the best horses. The best 2 horses in Bree, delivered as soon as possible guaranteed. Exactly how soon, as soon as possible, meant was anyone's guess really. But Eric was used to waiting by now anyway. After sorting out his lodgings and devouring a solid meal hungrily, he hit the streets to ask around. He needed to find out where he could buy crops locally. Thanks to his friendly rep, it didn't take long to get answers. He casually asked a couple of passing townsfolk, and they enthusiastically gave him a full rundown of Bree's market layout, east to west, and even listed which vendors sold what items. Following their directions, Eric soon arrived at a local farm. "Welcome, sir, how may I assist you?" The farmer greeted him warmly. Eric listed the crops he wanted, delighted to find they had everything. Pumpkins, potatoes, carrots, wheat. "Oh, what's this?" Eric asked, approaching a basket filled with yellow kernels. "Corn. New craft unlocked, corn seeds." "Perfect, I'll take a sack of this as well." "Right away, sir. Bree's hardest workers are at your service." And right beside that, garlic, onions, and ginger still covered with fresh soil. "I'll take these too." "Of course." By the end, Eric had spent every last silver coin he owned. That included a few charred ones taken from that orc squad. The farmer couldn't stop grinning. It had been an excellent day. This customer clearly didn't worry about money. He didn't even ask for prices. He just pointed and bought things by the sack. "Hope to see you again soon." Not likely, Eric thought. You'll see what Minecraft farming speed looks like soon enough. Ever seen wheat that grows in just a couple days? He left the farm with his backpack bulging with crop sacks, feeling satisfied. The only disappointment? No watermelons. Now that he thought about it, he hadn't seen any. With his seed collection complete, he just needed to wait for the horses. Then he could head home. As for the seeds, thanks to his crafting table, he could convert crops into seeds. They would have all the handy Minecraft properties. Animal breeding, though, that was still untested for him. Out in the wilderness near his roadside fortress, wild animals were rare. The most he'd seen were a few wild bulls. Those were better off turned into steak than dragged home. So buying 2 horses now had a second purpose. He wanted to test if they could be bred into full MC horses. But first things first, in Minecraft, breeding horses required gold. At minimum, 2 golden carrots were needed. And gold was, unfortunately, extremely difficult to mine. He'd been working the mines near his fortress for over a month. He hadn't seen even a glint of it. No choice, he had to trade for it. First stop, the blacksmith. Eric made his way to the familiar forge and stepped inside. "What can I do for yo, huh?" The blacksmith started, then smiled. "Oh, it's you. Good to see you again. What can I help with today?" "Glad you remember me." "Of course I do. Word travels fast around here." They say a lone adventurer passed through Bree recently. Single-handedly took out a gang of bandits and an entire pack. Orcs and direwolves all defeated. As he spoke, the blacksmith put down his tools and leaned in. His eyes gleamed with curiosity. "They also say you can use magic. Is that true?" Eric quickly held up a hand to stop him. "Whoa, hold up, my friend. That's not what I'm here for. I'm looking to buy something. Do you have any gold?" The blacksmith blinked, then gave a dramatic tilt of his head. "I'm a blacksmith, not a goldsmith, sir." "Figures." Just as Eric sighed and turned to leave, a voice called out nearby. A very familiar voice. "Hey there, adventurer. I couldn't help but overhear you're looking for gold." "Get lost, you junk-hawking gremlin," the blacksmith snapped immediately. "Stay away from my customers." Eric turned and, as expected, saw that face again. Grinning like a weasel. It was William the scavenger. Of course. He was struck by a sudden sense of déjà vu. Chapter 17, all set. Get lost. Once again, he'd had a deal stolen from right under his nose. Not that it was going anywhere anyway. The blacksmith was so furious, he nearly turned red with rage. He booted William clear off the street. Eric had no choice but to trail after him. "Huff puff, sir, I heard you loud and clear. You're looking for gold, right?" William was gasping for air after the sprint. But he still managed to keep his salesman's smile on. "Yes, I need gold, but I've got to ask something. Do you just lurk outside shops hoping to poach customers? If I were that blacksmith, I'd have punched you too." "Haha, no. Not every day, I just happen to be around today." Eric's eye twitched. "So not every day, which means often." "All right, whatever, tell me what you've got. How are you selling your gold?" "As one of my valued repeat customers, I'll give it to you. 80% of the market price, special deal." "That generous?" "We street vendors are known for our generosity," William said, hand on heart like he was taking an oath. Eric wasn't buying it at all. He still remembered that last batch of gear William sold him. It had practically crumbled into dust. "You better not be trying to sell me gold-painted scrap metal again." But he wasn't too concerned about it. After all, anything he put into his inventory would instantly be labeled. Identified by material, there'd be no hiding fake goods. Still, Eric followed William to his warehouse with healthy suspicion. The small, tucked-away street hadn't changed a bit. Dark, quiet, and borderline abandoned. Well, maybe a few buildings had gathered thicker layers of dust. Looked like no one had touched them in weeks. "Here we are, sir," William said, rummaging deep in the back before dragging out a box. Eric opened the box and blinked. It was full of jewelry, dull, spotted, and heavily tarnished. "Sir, behold, pure gold," William said proudly, holding up a bracelet like it was sacred. "You've got to be kidding me." Eric picked up the heavily blemished bracelet. Its original color was nearly hidden under the filth. He dropped it into his inventory. Tarnished gold bracelet. Estimated salvage, 2-3 gold bits. Ah, that explained it perfectly. It was gold, but poorly stored and probably decades old. While gold itself doesn't corrode easily, it can still collect grime over time, making it look like trash. "I'll take the lot." Eric said, shrugging. Appearance didn't matter to him at all. Once it went into the smelter, it all melted down the same. William's eyes lit up as he rubbed his hands together. He held up 10 fingers. Eric didn't have enough silver coins on hand at the moment, so he had to trade away a chunk of antique silver jewelry instead. Almost half of his stash went into the trade. But the gold haul wasn't bad, not bad at all. Most of the antiques Eric had taken from the ghoul were made of silver. Yet now, he'd managed to trade them for over double the volume in gold. In fact, silver was highly valued in this region, especially among elves. Rumor had it, elves preferred silver over gold. So, seeing that smug little grin on William's lips, Eric knew he'd made a profit. Not that he minded, the deal was fair enough and he got what he needed. Say what you will, but William knew how to run a business. His warehouse was full of junk, but somehow, he always found something relevant to sell. This guy was definitely not as broke as he pretended to be. Once the transaction was done, Eric didn't linger around. He headed straight back to the inn. Behind him, William wiped sweat from his brow as Eric disappeared down the street. "Well," came a voice from a shadowed doorway nearby. A scruffy man with a tangle of beard and soot-colored clothes stepped out. He emerged from a dilapidated building. Barely broke even. William muttered, lips twitching. Did he notice anything? Doesn't seem like it, not yet. The bearded man's voice turned grave. For your own good, make sure he doesn't find out. The night of the fire, I was out on the main road. Heard thunder without clouds, flames lit the forest. Then some water from the heavens put it out like it never happened. I couldn't resist checking it out, found nothing but craters and orc bodies. Not a single one intact. William's legs nearly gave out beneath him. I told those thugs not to mess with him. But you're the one who supplied them with weapons. You were dealing with orcs too, William snapped back in a whisper. That was the past, I'm telling you, drop it. Leave this place, if he finds out what's going on, we won't survive long enough to regret it. William fell silent, deep in thought. Eric, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware of any of this. Still, for some reason, a system message popped up in his mind. Reputation in Bree region +10. Apparently, he'd done something good, somehow, somewhere. Back at the inn, with nothing else to do, Eric started sorting through the day's haul. The gold jewelry, once melted down, would probably yield 2 or 3 solid ingots. Not a massive amount, but enough to craft 2 golden carats. The next 2 days passed uneventfully for him. Eric spent most of it eating, napping, and wandering around Bree to experience the local flavor. During his walks, he even stopped by a small farm. He bought 2 chickens to take home with him. As for livestock like pigs or cows, well, managing that solo sounded like a pain. Especially with 2 horses already in tow. It was moments like this that made Eric realize traveling alone had its downsides. Still, it wasn't hopeless at all. The forest and plains near Fort Road were full of wild animals. Boars, buffalo, even the occasional elk roamed freely. Up until now, he'd always hunted them for meat. But on the way back, maybe he could try capturing some live ones. For a small ranch. On that note, Bree was mostly populated by humans and hobbits. But every now and then, a few other races would pass through town. Like dwarves. Every time a dwarf caravan rolls through town. A local brewer once said, "My silver coin pouch gets fat, and they empty my entire wine cellar." Eric happened to catch sight of one such caravan during his stay. He followed it out of curiosity. To his amusement, it was either booze or finely crafted metal tools. Beautiful stuff, but not really useful to him. Still, it was fun to see dwarves up close. Short, burly, bearded little tanks, and incredibly lively. Their conversations were more like comedic performances, full of dramatic flair and booming laughter. Also, surprisingly tough. 25/25 HP. Same as the Dunedain warriors. The dwarf he chatted with was friendly enough, though every third sentence was an attempt to get Eric to buy something. Eric didn't buy a single thing from him. He walked back to the inn under the dwarf's disappointed, hairy glare. Upon returning, the innkeeper approached him. "Sir, your horses are ready." Great, let's take a look. Sure enough, two energetic-looking horses were waiting in the stable. Eric inspected them, and their stats appeared instantly before him. 26/26 max speed, 11 ms. 24/24 max speed, 10 ms. Truthfully, they weren't anything special at all. But as riding horses, they'd do just fine. At this point, everything was ready. It was time to head home. That is, until Eric took the reins and froze mid-step. Right. There was just one small problem he hadn't considered. He didn't know how to ride a horse. Chapter 18, Territory Expansion. Fortunately, this problem didn't trouble Eric for long. Under the bartender's watchful eye, Eric awkwardly clambered onto the horse. More than once, he caught the man looking ready to jump in and help him up. But the moment Eric finally settled into the saddle, a familiar sensation washed over him. It was like cooking, when everything just clicks into place. Whenever Eric thought about moving, the horse seemed to read his mind perfectly. A simple nudge of intention, and the horse responded immediately. The system was helping him again. Eric could feel that the system's assistance could be interrupted at any time. He could ride on his own skill if he wanted to. But honestly, not right now. He wasn't about to give up this magical help. With the system on his side, Eric suddenly felt confident. The next morning, he set out early, riding one horse and leading another, heading back to the farmer's house to pick up the two chickens he'd arranged to get. Once the chickens were secured in a cage, he hit the road. Surprisingly, the return trip wasn't any quicker than the journey there. Sure, horses could run faster than Eric could walk, but they needed rest and feeding along the way. Grass doesn't eat itself, after all. When the fortress finally came into view, Eric let out a relieved breath. The gate showed no signs of tampering. Things had stayed peaceful, at least for now. He settled the two horses and two chickens, then headed back inside the castle to organize supplies. First on the list was smelting. Eric dumped the pile of gold trinkets William had sold him into the furnace. Luck was on his side. He ended up with 4 solid gold ingots and a few gold scraps. He quickly crafted 2 golden carrots. Back outside, Eric offered a golden carrot to one of the horses. The horse eyed the shiny treat curiously, sniffed it carefully. After confirming it was just a carrot with a fancy color, it took a tentative bite. Almost instantly, a few red hearts appeared above its head. Not wasting a second, Eric fed the second golden carrot to the other horse. The two horses soon leaned against each other comfortably. Before long, something unexpected happened. Achievement unlocked. Where did I come from? Description: successfully bred a pair of animals. Looking closer, a somewhat bewildered foal had squeezed its way between the two big horses. One of the adult horses, clearly startled by the sudden appearance of this little newcomer, stepped back. Its eyes were wide with surprise. Eric, however, was grinning ear to ear. Luck was on his side today. This foal inherited the fastest horse's speed stat of 11 points, and a healthy 26 hit points as well. As the two adult horses stared curiously at their surprise offspring, Eric pulled out the 2 chickens. He fed them some wheat seeds. Before long, a little chick with bright, intelligent eyes hatched. Looking into those wise little eyes, Eric couldn't help but chuckle. Dumb kids always look the same, he muttered. With a foal in his left hand and a chick in his right, Eric felt the future was bright. No time for rest that day. He grabbed his pickaxe and stone blocks. He set to work on the castle walls. In just one day, he expanded the territory to more than double its original size. He also laid out new agricultural and livestock zones, plus a dedicated horse paddock with feeding troughs. The territory was now impressively large, several thousand square meters. Anyone passing by might mistake this for the estate of a powerful lord. While expanding, Eric didn't forget to keep breeding animals. Once he had at least 2 of each species, the original 2 horses and chickens were no longer needed. For breeding purposes, at least. He decided to fence off a separate area to keep the originals apart from the offspring. With that done, Eric moved on to planning the farmland. Pumpkins, wheat, potatoes, carrots, corn, onions, garlic, he had it all. Another day passed, and Eric gazed at the neatly organized fields with satisfaction. The crops were growing strong and healthy. Though the pasture still looked a little empty, as breeding progressed, they'd soon fill up. As for the horses, having bred only 2 golden ones so far wasn't enough to expand that area yet, so he'd put that on hold. Still, having horses that didn't need rest and could keep running was a huge advantage. They barely ate, just 3 bites of grass per 100 kilometers. And even then, it was mostly symbolic. All in all, the roadside fortress was thriving beautifully. That night, after using bone meal to speed up growth, a square pumpkin appeared on its vine. For the first time, Eric placed it atop an iron block and summoned his territory's first iron golem. Clang! At the instant the iron block and pumpkin touched, they fused into a towering iron giant. Over 3 meters tall, covered in moss and vines. Unlike the blocky creatures from video games, this golem had a more realistic, rounded appearance. Though it still looked adorably dopey. No sooner was it summoned than the iron golem began patrolling the grounds. Its targeting system was simple enough. If hostile, attack; if not, ignore. A day later, there were 20 iron golems standing guard inside the fortress. With so many golems around, a small squad of under 100 could be handled easily. And even a few hundred orcs wouldn't be an impossible fight. The territory's security was well on its way to being solid. A week went by without incident. The crops were harvested, and seeing the neatly stacked vegetables in the warehouse filled Eric with satisfaction. Deep satisfaction. That night, he picked a few stalks of green onions. He cooked a delicious stir-fried beef with scallions. It was heavenly, absolutely heavenly. Life right now was simply idyllic. That same day, Eric went mining as usual. Suddenly, he spotted 3 wild bulls drinking at the lakeside. He quickly changed course, sneaking closer. Not drawing his sword this time. After a tremendous effort, he managed to corral and subdue one of the bulls. Then dragged it back to the fortress. 21/30. These wild bulls were tough, thick-skinned, and hard to handle. The next day, Eric hid by the lake again. He caught another one the same way. With 2 bulls now sharing the pasture, Eric enjoyed unlimited fresh milk. And bred 2 wild calves from wheat seeds, ensuring a steady supply of meat in the future. This was a win-win situation. Eric won twice over. After the bulls, Eric noticed wild boars in the area. He repeated the same routine. Sneak, approach slowly, corral, subdue, drag home. Once the boars were settled, Eric even built a simple egg collector. Basically, he placed some funnels under the chicken coop, connecting them to a chest below. Now, no more hunting around for eggs everywhere. Since returning from the city, Eric's days had been packed with activity. He was either mining or managing his crops and livestock. Despite using so much iron, his stockpile wasn't shrinking at all. In fact, it was growing steadily. The iron vein he was mining showed no signs of running dry. It looked like an abundant source. Everything was running smoothly, the territory was developing well, and resources were plentiful. A couple of days later, Eric prepared to head east. Early morning, he saddled up the faster horse. Equipped it with iron horse armor, ready to set off. Then, unexpectedly, a visitor arrived at his gates. Faradin. Hey there, Eric greeted from a distance, dressed neatly and leading a slightly dopey-looking horse. How have you been? All right. Faradin replied, scanning the roadside fortress with surprise. This place looks different, much bigger, and... He glanced at the farm and pasture inside the walls. I don't think these were here last time. Oh, those, I planted them a few days ago. A few days. Faradin squinted. Those corn stalks look like they've been growing for 2 months. Eric just shrugged. With this guy, normal logic didn't apply. The Wanderer was getting used to Eric's antics. Looking at Eric's neat outfit and the not-so-bright horse he was leading, he asked, Looks like I'm not catching you at a good time. You're heading out. Yeah, I'm going to check out the Shadow Valley. Shadow Valley? Faradin looked Eric up and down carefully. I know the place. There's a little trail through the wasteland that leads there. Hope you don't get lost. Chapter 19. The Forest of Ogres Warg Ambush. Thanks, but seriously, did you come all this way for something important? You could stay a few more days. I've been experimenting with some new recipes. No need for an extended stay. The Dunedain replied with a grin. But yes, I did come to talk to you about something. He paused, then said more seriously. Eric, ever since that cavalry squad was wiped out, the Goblin King in the Misty Mountains has caught wind of you. There's a good chance he'll try to retaliate. You'd best be careful when you move around. Goblin King. The first name that popped into Eric's head was Azog. But he quickly shook that thought away. He'd never heard Azog referred to as the Goblin King. Then it clicked, that guy. A bloated, towering goblin came to mind. The one who lived holed up in a cave somewhere. Yes, it had to be him. I understand, thanks for the warning. Dunedains were always hard to pin down. Despite Eric's attempts to get him to stay longer, the man refused. All he agreed to was a short stroll through the territory to see what was new. Like the iron golems, these hulking machines stared at the visitor with expressionless faces, making him visibly uneasy. One of them even scratched its metal head. Then somehow pulled a tiny red flower out of nowhere and handed it to him. No hostile intent, just surprisingly good social programming. Thanks, the Dunedain said, taking the flower with a polite nod. After the quick tour, the wanderer left as swiftly as he'd come. Not long after, Eric mounted his horse and galloped eastward along the main road. And honestly, having a horse made travel ridiculously efficient. This one only clocked in at around 11.5 meters per second. But the key was that it could maintain that pace indefinitely. Plus, Eric didn't need rest either. Man and horse ran full tilt for an entire day. Arriving at a notable landmark at incredible speed, the last bridge. As he neared the river, Eric slowed his steed to a trot. He guided it across the stone bridge step by step, taking a moment to admire the scenery. The water shimmered in the sunset, casting a crimson glow over the fading daylight. This is it. The Forest of Ogres. Eric muttered, unfolding his map. Northeast of here lay the infamous forest. Home to a dangerous concentration of ogres from both the eastern wastelands and the Misty Mountains. And despite the misleading name, it held far more than just 3 ogres. Eric didn't know the exact location of the trio. That would one day try to roast Bilbo Baggins. But that didn't stop his curiosity, who knows? Maybe he'd stumble across them. And if not, well, a little sightseeing never hurt. Even if the view here was aggressively average. Having made up his mind, Eric dug a large pit near the bridge. He stowed his horse inside and sealed the entrance like a bizarre reverse stable. Thanks to traveling by horse, he'd barely touched his food supplies over the last couple of days. His provisions were still plentiful. Confident the horse was secure, Eric wasted no time and sprinted northeast. The sun vanished almost instantly. Night fell over the land. A breeze rustled the trees, but failed to stir Eric in the slightest. Rustle! He pushed through a thick clump of bushes, startling a panicked rabbit. Before letting out a quiet sigh of disappointment. Half the night had passed since he entered the forest. And still, not a single ogre in sight. Anyone watching would think he was insane. Most people would run from monsters, Eric. He actively sought them out and couldn't find a single one. What are they all hiding from me? Just then, a sudden movement in the bushes behind him broke his train of thought. A dark figure leapt out, blade raised high, charging straight at him. Aha, look what I found. Swish! In a blink, Eric whipped out his sword and spun backward in a fluid motion. Critical hit. GRK. The attacker collapsed in an instant. Eric eyed the body, an orc. He immediately tensed up. These things never traveled alone. They were like cockroaches. Spot one, and you could bet there were more nearby. Still, this one hadn't had time to alert the others. Maybe he'd get lucky. Unfortunately, the moment the scent of blood hit the air, any hope of a quiet night vanished. AWOO. The wargs began to howl loudly. The sound came from way too close. Eric's skin prickled. He dropped his pack and strapped on his armor in record time. Wrestle, wrestle, wrestle. Wargs burst from the foliage, one after another. The lead beast lunged at Eric, with its massive jaws wide open. That bite could probably cleave a man in half. Thud! A wooden tower shield reinforced with iron slammed into place just in time. The lead warg crashed into it, dazed from the rebound. It didn't even get a second to recover. Eric immediately slashed downward, another critical hit. The warg let out a howl and collapsed. More followed, snarling and lunging from every direction. Eric fought while slowly retreating, shield raised, sword swinging. At any given moment, 7 or 8 wargs were attacking simultaneously. But he still made time to strike each fallen one just to be sure. So long as the shield held, they couldn't do much to him. Their attacks lacked the raw strength to break through it. Sure, they were fast, but he was faster. Thump! Eric blocked a pounce with the shield, spun around, and sliced cleanly through another beast. But in that instant, a different warg lunged at his back and clamped down on his waist. A sharp jolt of pain shot through his side. That one had been waiting patiently, just for a moment of distraction. -1. Not a lot of damage, though. Lucky for Eric, it bit down on one of the most heavily armored spots on his body. Still, he'd almost forgotten, the wargs weren't the only problem. Up on a nearby rock outcrop, an orc archer quietly knocked an arrow and aimed carefully. Twang! Eric's vision jolted as something struck his helmet. The orc grinned, baring yellowed teeth. Bullseye right between the eyes. The arrow had seemingly pierced the silver helm and lodged itself deep. Headshot. But then the orc's smug expression twisted into pure horror. Eric calmly pulled the arrow out of his head, crimson dripping down his face. He looked directly at the archer with a slow, deliberate glare. -4. That one hit hard. If not for the helmet, it might have been fatal. But it wasn't. His hunger bar ticked down slightly, his health bar shot right back up. No big deal. He ignored the archer for now and dove back into the fray. One warg after another fell. From his rocky perch, the orc archer watched in disbelief. How was this guy still alive? The wargs had bitten him, he'd been hit by arrows. But nothing stuck, he just kept healing and swinging. The orc tried again, loosing another arrow. But Eric raised the shield every time, blocking each shot. He'd rather take another warg bite than let one of those arrows land. It wasn't long before the battlefield quieted down. Eric stood alone among a pile of defeated warg bodies, casually chewing a piece of dried beef. The orc's eyes widened in terror as Eric walked toward him. Swish! One clean stroke, and the archer fell. Chapter 20, The Ogre. Phew. After a brief but intense fight, Eric didn't bother lingering around. He gave the battlefield a quick once-over, looting anything of value before moving on. Something among the spoils caught his eye. It was a bow, one he'd never seen before, with a distinctive, rugged design. Orcish bow. Plus 10% range damage. Plus 10% attack range. A weapon with special stats. The last time he saw an item with added traits was that dagger. He snagged it off the scrap merchant. Eric picked up the bow and examined it with interest. Compared to the basic wooden bows he could craft himself, this one was clearly made from higher-grade materials. The grip had a faint metallic texture. Not something you'd get from regular woodwork, quality craftsmanship. Say what you will about orcs, they knew how to make weapons. He bent down, grabbed a stray arrow from the ground, and gave the bow a test shot. The arrow flew with a satisfying thunk and buried itself deep into a nearby tree. Solid performance. Truth be told, this was Eric's first time firing a bow. On one hand, he'd never found the materials needed to craft bowstrings. On the other, he'd always favored melee combat. In a world of cold steel and brute force, he dismissed archery as a niche tool. Sure, the orc squad he wiped out earlier had archers. But after he carpet-bombed them, there wasn't much left to loot. Calling the scene a mess would have been generous. But now, holding this weapon in hand, Eric felt something stir. Familiarity. Yes, this felt right. With the system's assistance, the learning curve was laughably low. The moment he notched an arrow, his posture locked into the ideal stance. Smooth and practiced, none of that fumbling you'd expect from a rookie. After a few test shots, Eric had already grasped the basics of archery. Well, basic usage at least. Hitting the target consistently, mastering arrow arcs and leading shots. That would take time, practice, and probably a lot of arrows. Luckily, the system let him toggle assistance on and off. But until he fully mastered the craft, he wasn't taking the training wheels off just yet. Unfortunately, the orc archer didn't carry many arrows with him. Even after collecting every single one he'd fired, Eric only had 9 in total. Not ideal. It was already late, deep into the second half of the night. Eric found a nearby cave to rest in. He built a small campfire and skewered a corn cob on a stick, roasting it slowly over the flames. Sure, he could just gnaw on some jerky to fill his belly. But life was about more than survival. It needed flavor, a bit of ceremony. The fire crackled as the scent of roasting corn filled the cave. Unable to resist, Eric bit into the cob. Soft, sweet, and fragrant, pure bliss. Perfect timing. He mumbled with a grin. Thump. Suddenly, Eric felt the ground beneath him tremble. He instinctively turned toward the direction of the vibration. In the flickering firelight, a hulking shadow emerged. Eric quietly put down his corn. Thump, thump. The shadow drew closer, revealing its immense size. The closer it got, the more massive it seemed. Until finally, a bloated head and grotesque body loomed into view. Then it spoke in a guttural, broken tongue. Food eating food. And that's when Eric saw it clearly. An ogre. Well now. The ogre cried gleefully, bouncing on its heels. Look what wandered into my cave, fresh meat delivered right to the door. Eric sprang to his feet, just as excited. Well, I'll be, look what I stumbled into, an ogre. That threw the ogre off completely. Wait, why was this supposed meal so happy about being eaten? Before the ogre could piece that together, Eric blurred into motion. And suddenly, he was clad in gleaming armor. A longsword reflected in the ogre's dazed pupils, growing rapidly larger. Slash. ARGH. The ogre roared, clutching its eye and stumbling back as crimson streamed down its face. In its pain, it swiped blindly, flinging a spray of stone fragments at Eric. He was forced to retreat, shielding himself with his buckler. Yikes! Eric grunted when he noticed a bright red bar floating above the ogre's head. 53/60 HP. This beast didn't just have a lot of health, it also had 2 full blocks of armor. Tougher than a ghoul, even. You little pest, I'll crush you. The ogre roared and swung with terrifying strength, smashing the campfire and charging toward Eric. He barely dodged, crouching and aiming another strike, but the ogre reacted fast, punching low and wide. With no space to evade, Eric had to raise his shield. Clang! The impact shook his arms to the bone, and the shield groaned under pressure, then cracked. A cooldown icon blinked above it. Great, Eric muttered, shield's broken. Knowing he couldn't win in a head-on fight against this monster, Eric dashed out of the cave, taking a glancing hit to his ribs. -3 HP. Okay, that hit harder than a wolf bite. Reaching open ground, Eric grabbed a round stone from his pack and, fueled by raw panic, hurled it toward the cave entrance. The boulder jammed perfectly in the gap, sealing the ogre inside. Damn it! Inside, the ogre slammed against the barrier. Cracks began forming already. Its brute power was no joke. Eric drew his new bow, nocked an arrow, and aimed through a small gap left for air and sight. Thwip! Arg! The scream confirmed a clean neck shot. That one arrow shaved 8 HP from the ogre's bar. Now frightened, the ogre covered its face to protect its head and eyes. But once the cave was sealed, its fate was decided. You ever heard, Eric murmured while drawing another arrow, of the legendary cowardly builder? Arrow after arrow zipped through the gap. The ogre took 7, maybe 8 hits before collapsing with a thunderous crash. It never broke through the stone wall. No worries if you hadn't heard of him before, Eric said, lowering his bow. You just met him. When the cave fell silent, Eric approached carefully. What he saw made him blink. Holy crap, nearly a meter of solid rock, and it almost broke through. Yeah, that ogre wasn't just strong, it was absurdly strong. Next time, he'd double the wall. Sadly, the ogre dropped no rare loot. Its only real use might be fertilizer, or maybe the bones. As for the meat, no thanks. Eric's tolerance ended at direwolves, and even they tasted like wet dog and despair. A quick search confirmed his guess. The ogre was broke. No coins, no gear, not even a cracked tooth worth keeping. But then, wait, did it say this was its home? That changed everything. If this cave was its den, there had to be a stash. Treasure. That was exactly why Eric had come here. He thought it was just a random cave, but an ogre's lair meant loot. Probably. Lighting a torch, he went deeper into the darkness. Soon, his nose twisted in disgust. Bones, rot, and filth covered the floor, the air thick and sour. Even Eric, who'd walked through corpse piles before, hesitated. Hygiene wasn't this guy's skill. Just as he turned to leave, the firelight flickered across the far wall. Something shimmered. Something hidden in the deepest corner caught the glow and reflected it. Chapter 21, The Ogre's Treasure. A metallic glint caught Eric's eye, making him forget the grime underfoot. Without hesitation, he rushed over, torch raised. The flickering light revealed a heap of coins, some tarnished, others still bright, mostly silver. Scattered nearby lay strange trinkets, utensils, plates, goblets, candlesticks, crafted from mixed metals. Some silver, some gold. A grin spread across Eric's face. Jackpot! With clinks and rattles, he gathered every valuable thing and stuffed his backpack. Soon, he ran out of space. After a short mental debate, he set up a quick smelting station. Using nearby materials, he built a crude reverse furnace and tossed in the random metal scraps. When the last spoon melted, the results were clear. 5 gold ingots, 11 silver ingots, and a pouch of coins. Just like that, his pack was light again. In terms of volume, it wasn't much, mostly tableware, but the quantity had made it bulky. As he sorted the refined loot, a new message popped up. New crafting recipes unlocked, metal cutlery, hanging chandeliers. Nice. Eric switched to his usual tactic, block the cave entrance, ready the bow, and kite the ogre around. It didn't take long before the ogre collapsed, groaning its final word. Despy Cobbly. Eric stepped over the body without looking and walked inside the cave, torch in hand. Experience was everything. This time, his search was fast and precise. Every possible hiding spot was checked. Anything bulky or useless went straight into the smelter. Efficient, clean, professional. Watching his inventory fill with ingots and coins, Eric let out a satisfied sigh. This forest is basically made of money. Ogres are walking loot boxes. He nodded in approval and moved deeper into the forest. 1 week later. Nighttime. Deep in the woods, an ogre crouched in a bush, holding a struggling goat. With a quick twist, it ended the animal's struggle and ran toward its cave. Come on, come on. Sweating nervously, the ogre's huge head darted left and right. Please don't show up, please don't show up, I just want to eat in peace. No sign of that treasure-stealing ghost, right? Please. After a long run, it finally saw its cave entrance. Relief washed over it as it rushed inside, lit a fire, and began roasting its catch. The goat's skin started to sizzle, the air filling with the smell of cooking meat. The ogre, licking its lips, slowly relaxed. Chewing loudly on the roasted mutton, it let out a content sigh as warmth spread through its belly. That so-called treasure ghost. If it dares to come here, I'll crush it. Oh, is that so? Of course, the ogre replied proudly. Then it stopped. It turned its massive head and found a human standing right next to it. A crooked grin formed on the ogre's face. Looks like I'm having seconds tonight, heh. Thud. Moments later, the ogre staggered back, clutching its neck, and fell with a heavy crash. Eric stood beside the body, calmly chewing on dried meat while waiting for his health to recover. He had spent a full week hunting ogres in this forest, playing a deadly game of cat and mouse. By now, he had taken down more than a dozen. And honestly, he wasn't using his bow much anymore. Ogres were too durable. By his 4th kill, His arrows were either broken or dull. So he switched to melee combat, using a plain iron sword, a worn shield, and half-dented armor. If things went bad, he had options: dig a trench, wall himself in, or build a quick tower. At first, their raw power terrified him. A single hit from an ogre could crack solid rock. If that connected, it would hurt like hell. But after many battles, and a few painful lessons, Eric began to understand them. Their attack patterns, their signals, their timing. He had learned through pain and practice, every mistake carved into reflex. Most people wouldn't survive the first blow. But Eric did, and he kept improving, dodging smarter, blocking tighter, striking faster. He wasn't a PvP expert, but in PvA. He was getting there. Later that night, Eric walked out of another cave, frowning. Broke, completely broke. The ogre inside had nothing valuable, just bones and grime. Yeah, not every ogre was hoarding treasure. In fact, after a week, he realized most weren't. Whether a cave had loot or not was pure luck, like a living loot box. But there was another problem. Eric noticed he was finding fewer and fewer ogres. That day he had only met one, and that was pure luck. The creature had left its cave to hunt, or he wouldn't have seen it at all. Then he remembered what it said before dying. The treasure ghost. Eric frowned. Wait, are they talking about me? He rubbed his temples as the truth hit him. Maybe he had made too much of a name for himself. If word was spreading among the ogres, that meant, they're hiding from me now. That could be trouble. Sighing, Eric stepped over the fire pit, ready to leave, when something caught his eye. He froze. There, jammed in the roasting rack, was a greasy, soot-covered stick. Eric squinted. Was it glowing? He leaned closer. No doubt, it was glowing from within. Without thinking, Eric grabbed it and pulled it out. Filthy ancient elven sword. Chapter 22, The Tunnel. I scrub, scrub, scrub. In a dim cave, Eric crouched over a shallow puddle, furiously washing a filthy stick with a bucket of water beside him. The stick, of course, was anything but ordinary. It had been coated in layers of grime and grease. He hit it, scraped it, dunked it again, and scrubbed like a madman. After a fierce struggle involving determination and a few muttered curses, the grime finally peeled away. Beneath it shone a clean blade, sparkling faintly under the dim light. Eric's eyes widened. The old muck-covered sword transformed before him. The cursed tag, coated in filth, disappeared from its description. It now displayed a new name. Ancient Elven Sword. Attack +9. Holy crap. That was 2 points higher than a diamond sword. Basically, this thing was a diamond sword with sharpness III built in. What kind of loot was this? Jackpot. Diamond sword? Forget it. Nothing could come between him and his new friend, the ancient elven sword. He studied it in awe. Anything with elven in the name and ancient as a prefix had to be incredibly old. Elves were nearly immortal, so if this sword was truly theirs, it was from an age long before humans had plumbing. Eric figured it came from the last age, maybe even earlier. Gotta hand it to those Middle-earth level blacksmiths. Their weapons aged better than fine wine. No rust, no decay, just flawless, battle-ready craftsmanship. After admiring his new blade, Eric glanced at the muddy puddle he had used as a wash basin. Bits of old grime floated on the murky surface. He looked at his empty bucket. Yeah, no, this water's retired. Then his eyes returned to the glowing sword. That single weapon was worth more than a chest filled with gold or silver. Wait a second. Was it still glowing? Warning signals rang in his head. Eric's eyes narrowed. He tensed, gripped the hilt, and crept out of the cave, blending into the shadows of nearby bushes. Wrestle, wrestle. Moments later, heavy footsteps echoed nearby. An orc ran past, heading toward a larger one riding a direwolf. Boss, I saw torchlight inside that cave. The mounted orc grunted. Ignore it, that's ogre territory. Yes, sir, the orc saluted and retreated. But the direwolf beneath the leader began sniffing the air, clearly uneasy. What is it, girl? The leader asked, stroking her coarse fur. Her crimson eyes scanned the darkness, locking onto the bushes. Eric sighed quietly. These direwolves were the worst. They didn't just have sharper noses than dogs. They could climb trees, scale cliffs, anything. His gaze moved toward the patrol. Around 20 riders, each armored and armed. He tightened his grip. 20 mounted enemies, that was bad news. If he had diamond armor, maybe he'd stand a chance. At least he could take hits while charging. But with iron gear, he was far from invincible. Truthfully, Eric wasn't some combat prodigy. His fighting skills were decent, not great. Against ogres, sure, he had methods, but 10 or more enemies meant trouble. Should he run? No, not happening. I just got this sword. He wouldn't let a pack of beasts and green thugs drive him away. Still, any experienced Minecraft player knew better than to rush a mounted mob. As one wolf prowled closer, Eric quietly backed away, staying low. The beast sniffed the bushes, catching only a faint trace. Something was here. Maybe, the leader muttered, stay sharp. By then, Eric was already gone. He pulled out a shovel. Plan B, dig. While the patrol advanced, Eric dug a tunnel, covering his trail. Once done, he followed them from a safe distance. They're heading toward the misty mountains, he murmured, probably back to base. Perfect, they wouldn't expect an ambush. Eric crept through the underbrush, drew his glowing sword, and leaped from the bushes with a wide slash. Thwack! The rear rider didn't even scream. Sword met neck. His direwolf fell next, split clean in two. Maybe direwolves weren't so tough, or maybe the sword was just that sharp. Ambush, someone yelled. Another rider charged, swinging a cleaver. Eric blocked with his shield, shoved him back, and sprinted off while the others turned. Of course, he couldn't outrun wolves forever. One got too close. Eric jumped into a thicket. The wolf lunged in but found only emptiness. No man, no footprints. Gone. The rest arrived. Where the hell is he? The wolves sniffed again. Fresh dirt, disturbed ground. No movement. Far below, Eric lifted a dirt block and climbed out from another tunnel. What's that? One scout muttered. He approached a square patch of freshly dug soil. Did someone farm here? His confusion ended when a flash of white light burst beneath him. Thud. His mount collapsed. The orc hit the ground and was quickly impaled. Over there, a voice shouted. But by the time they reached the spot, Eric had vanished. Thump. He was already in another tunnel, sealing the entrance. Where is he? The leader snarled. This was supposed to be a simple patrol, not a ghost hunt. Ah! Another scream. Another rider down. He's over here. No, he's behind us. Ow, what the? They couldn't tell how many enemies there were. The attacks came from everywhere, impossible to track. It's more than one, has to be. Cowards, the leader roared. Face us if you dare. Silence. Eric peeked from another hole, waited, then struck again. Whack, another orc fell. I see you. WTZZ. An arrow sliced through the air, thunk. Eric grunted as it hit his chest. Ha, the leader laughed. Got you, I'll gut you like a fish and feast on your bones. Eric pulled the arrow out, tossed it into his backpack and said, thanks for the ammo. Then he sprinted off again. He dove into another thicket. The leader's grin vanished. He disappeared again. They reached the area and found nothing but smooth ground. Now the leader looked nervous. One human shouldn't cause this much chaos. The forest was full of traps. Keep chasing, and they'd die one by one. He made the smart call. Everyone fall back. Thwack! An arrow shot from below, piercing his shoulder through the armor. He screamed, looking down. There it was, a perfect square tunnel entrance. Everything suddenly made sense. Chapter 23, Pursuit. Low health elite. Seriously, how do you not go for the kill? Eric saw it clearly. The final arrow dropped the orc squad leader to only 7 HP. Execution threshold reached. Without hesitation, Eric rushed from the tunnel. Before the nearest orc could react, his sword was already drawn. A single swift swing, and the leader hit the ground lifeless, his health bar erased. With their commander gone, the remaining orcs panicked. Their dire wolves trembled, ears low and nostrils wide, unsure who to follow. Eric didn't pause. He dove into the chaos like a storm of blades, cutting through both riders and beasts. Several fell before they even raised their weapons. The scent of iron filled the air, heavy and sharp. Finally, one orc screamed, "Kill him, he's alone." SHHK. Eric's blade shimmered again. The wolf beneath the shouting orc collapsed, its legs severed mid-run. One upward slash and the rider's head jerked back, then he fell. That orc, who had tried to lead the others, never finished his cry. With him gone, confusion ruled once more. Some orcs charged forward, hoping to overwhelm the human. They didn't get far. Eric needed only 2 hits per kill, sometimes less. His sword sliced through them effortlessly. They had no structure, no tactics, only wild aggression. They rushed him like panicked villagers, hopeless and clumsy. The ones outside the fight only worsened it, clustering together, blocking those trying to escape like a crowd stuck at a concert exit. A few shouted commands, but Eric ended them swiftly. Even when wounded, he always targeted anyone trying to lead. At that moment, he grasped the true power of command. When that orc captain lived, Eric had to hide, strike from shadows, and flee after each kill. 1 second too slow, and he'd be surrounded. But now, if he wished, he could simply walk away. The difference was enormous. He thought, no wonder that when Azog died in the War of the 5 Armies, the entire orc army collapsed. A group without order, no matter its size, was just a mob of blind insects. Nothing to fear. Blood soaked his clothes, ran down his hair, and splattered across his face, yet his sword still shone bright, steady like a star. That glowing blade became the last sight many orcs and wolves ever saw. When more than half the cavalry lay dead or dying, Eric thought about retreating. Numbers didn't lie. Even clumsy enemies could wear him down through sheer persistence. He was already at half HP, and his saturation bar wasn't great. Then something odd happened. The orcs began to hesitate. They stared at him, alone, drenched in blood, breathing hard, but still standing, eyes sharp as ever. Worse yet, he was healing. Healing. It horrified them. They couldn't tell what was worse, that he lived or that he looked untouched. He had been stabbed and bitten, yet each time, he pulled the weapon out and fought on as if it were nothing. Once or twice was eerie, 4 or 5 times became terrifying. Now, many orcs saw him as a cursed being that couldn't die. Eric, meanwhile, backed into an open space, yelled fiercely while waving his sword for effect, then hunched over and chewed on dried meat like his life depended on it. Because it did. When his saturation bar filled and HP began to climb again, he shouted, "I'm just waiting to regen. What about you?" The air grew thick with the smell of blood. Finally, the orcs broke. Some died, others fled. The entire unit was wiped out. Over 20 mounted orcs were dead, more than 40 bodies counting the wolves, scattered like refuse after a feast. Eric's shining sword dimmed, its aura fading. A soft chime echoed in his mind. Faction reputation, Valifolk plus 100. Faction reputation, Dunedain plus 100. Achievement unlocked, Friend of the Hidden Vale. Achievement unlocked, Ally of the Dunedain. Eric blinked, He opened his status panel. Apparently, once your faction reputation hit 10, he had to admit, elves were absurdly blessed. With their long lifespans and dedication to their crafts, even a mildly diligent elf could become a master of many things. Warriors, mages, artisans, they had time for it all. And the looks. Let's just say this was a land where beauty was apparently standard issue. Walking through the valley felt like strolling through an impossibly graceful fashion show. No trolls here. Also, Eric had noted something else. Elves had 30 HP. Naturally. Because why wouldn't they? Just then, one of the elves finally approached, unable to contain his curiosity. "Greetings, traveler from afar. Do you bring any news from the human towns to the west?" Eric smiled politely. "Same old. People living, trading, gossiping, surviving. Nothing newsworthy, really. We heard you single-handedly defeated a cavalry squad." "Is that true?" Eric scratched the back of his head. "More or less. Incredible. And do you practice magic?" "A bit. But honestly, Beating them had more to do with some clever tricks. And well, luck. And a few game-breaking exploits, but that was classified. Impressive, the elf said sincerely. A new star rises among the humans. Will you be staying with us for a while? If I can, I'd love to, Eric replied. Splendid. If you don't mind, I'd be honored to show you around. Our valley is safe and beautiful. Evil has no place here. Eric grinned. Then I'm all yours. Tour guide unlocked. Oh, and I didn't catch your name. Aglanier, the elf replied. Eric. They walked through a land that seemed torn straight from a painter's dream. Mountains, waterfalls, high towers, cozy taverns, farms so perfect they could have been stitched into a tapestry. This place had it all. Everything crafted with elegance, from grand halls to the smallest street lantern. Though it lacked the mysterious serenity of night, the valley in daylight was something else entirely, vivid, lush, and breathtaking. Eric couldn't help but sigh. This place is incredible. I don't think I've ever seen such beauty. Honestly, I'm not sure I want to go back home. Aglanier smiled proudly. That's how most of us felt when we arrived, even the humans. Clang! Just then, a rhythmic hammering rang out, drawing Eric's attention to a nearby building. Following his gaze, Aglanier said something. That's the forge. Last night's skirmish left a few weapons and pieces of armor in need of repair. Our smiths are taking care of it. Eric's interest was piqued. Mind if I take a look inside? Of course not. You're a guest of Lord Elrond himself. You're welcome anywhere. Clang! The moment Eric stepped inside, he saw a tall elven smith hammering down on a glowing longsword. Noticing the visitor, the blacksmith paused and nodded politely. This is Eric, a guest of the Lord. He's curious about your craft, Aglanier explained. Ah, welcome, the smith replied in a measured tone. As you can see, I'm forging a new blade. Even with enchantments and training, it's important to keep one's skills sharp. I take on repairs and commissions whenever I can. Eric's gaze landed on the shining sword. May I? He asked. By all means. Carefully, Eric lifted the longsword from the anvil. Elven steel sword, attack +7. His eyebrows shot up. Wait, is this your standard weapon quality? Yes, the smith replied, almost confused. Why? No reason. No reason at all. Just wow. It's flawless. Really impressive work. Internally, Eric was screaming. This is a freaking diamond-tier sword. Why are your basic weapons this cracked? Out loud, he said something different. You elves sure don't mess around. Thank you. Our techniques are ancient, refined over countless generations. There's deep wisdom behind every strike. The smith then launched into an unexpectedly riveting lecture on elven smithing history. How the Guild of Jewelrights had evolved, how the craft moved to the valley, the spiritual harmony between magic and metallurgy. Eric found himself thoroughly absorbed. Even the forge itself had history. Apparently, the anvil was older than several human kingdoms combined. Eric rested a hand on the exquisitely engraved forge table, marveling at the age and artistry. Special crafting block detected, Valley Forge. Alley forging mod installed. Valley faction recipes unlocked. Eric froze. Wait, what? He blinked rapidly at the UI notifications only he could see. A new mod had just been installed. Something wrong? Aglanier asked, noticing the look on his face. Eric blinked again. Oh. No, just impressed. This forge is older than my entire bloodline. You needn't be so surprised. In our lands, many things have long and winding histories. It may seem strange to you, but to us, it's quite ordinary. Right. Of course. Outwardly, Eric nodded politely. Inwardly, his thoughts were spinning. He quickly opened his crafting menu and saw a flood of new recipes, tagged with the Elven faction icon. Elven steel sword. Elven spear. Full elven armor set. And to craft them, he needed a material called elven steel. And how to get elven steel? According to the new data, it required a newly unlocked forge structure, the alloy furnace. By placing coal and iron into the furnace and investing a bit of experience, he could refine the mix into elven steel. The XP part made sense. Magic needed a conduit, and in this world, experience often doubled as mana. If he skipped the XP cost, the result was ordinary steel, stronger than iron, but nothing close to the magically forged elven version. Eric stood there quietly, processing this. For days now, he'd been worrying about outgrowing his iron gear. His combat strength was increasing fast, and normal armor just wasn't cutting it anymore. But diamonds, those were a distant dream. He'd even half considered sneaking into the lonely mountain to see if he could loot something under the dragon's nose. But now, with this alloy mod unlocked, his path forward had never looked clearer. And thank the stars, he might not need to risk dragon breath to get a proper set of high-tier gear. Chapter 26, Departure. Eric had always been fascinated by Smog the dragon, especially the valuable materials clinging to that scaly behemoth. He'd been eyeing that prize for a while now. There was no way he was letting that opportunity pass him by. But not yet. He wasn't afraid of dragons per se. Worst case scenario, he could always dig himself a hole and play coward until the coast was clear. The real problem was if the dragon left the mountain and went stomping downhill, where people lived. That would be a massacre. And despite his usually carefree nature, Eric didn't want to be the reason a village turned into a smoking crater. No, he wasn't ready to face a dragon head-on. Not yet. Brushing the thought aside, Eric turned his attention back to the present. An elven smith was enthusiastically explaining their forging techniques. Eric nodded along, pretending to soak it all in, but mostly just adding another mental note to his collection. To craft a high-quality weapon or suit of armor, the elven artisans began by refining steel into an incredibly pure form. Then, through a series of meticulous and sometimes wildly complex steps, they would slowly shape it. Beating, folding, and chanting until a masterpiece emerged. Eric's process, however, looked more like a lazy alchemist's fever dream. He just dumped the raw materials into his alloy furnace, tossed in a handful of experience, waited until it smelled ready. Then slapped it together at a crafting bench. Simple. Brainless. Efficient. The elven smith beside him, of course, had no idea his race is sacred. Centuries-old techniques had just been reverse-engineered. It took less time than it took to cook a sausage. Technically speaking, Eric didn't actually know how forging worked. His system was basically a black box. He only needed to know which buttons to press, not why they worked. And honestly, that was fine by him. As long as the results were good, he didn't care what sort of mystical nonsense made the cogs turn. This little trip to the hidden valley had already paid for itself in full. Eric had to consciously stop himself from grinning too hard. He was already dreaming of getting back home, locking himself in his workshop and churning out gear. Like an overcaffeinated dwarf on commission. But first, he had to play along with a few more formalities. After leaving the forge, Eric wandered through the valley for a bit until noon rolled around. To his surprise, a Glanir, his new elf buddy, seemed genuinely fond of him and invited him to lunch. "Welcome to my humble home, Eric." A Glanir himself did the cooking. The meal was fresh, balanced, and had way more meat than Eric expected. Turns out, elves weren't vegetarians out of principle, they just didn't like cooking for dwarves. Dwarves, apparently, were rude guests. Hence, vegetables with no seasoning. Elves, perfectly capable of seasoning and roasting a good haunch. Of course, no elven meal was complete without a glass of wine. A Glanir poured Eric a deep red, rich and fragrant. "Thanks for the hospitality," Eric said, raising his cup. The food was delicious, the wine mellow, and the conversation pleasant. It wasn't long before their plates were clean, and Eric was leaning back, thoroughly satisfied. Then a thought struck him. "I've heard elves carry a special kind of travel ration, lembas, right? I've always been curious what it's like." A Glanir blinked, clearly not expecting the request. "Lembas, I do bring a few pieces when I travel. If you're interested, I can share some." He stepped out and returned with 3 golden leaf-wrapped squares that looked like hard biscuits. Lembas. Special effect, restores 10 HP per second. Eric gave a low whistle. Once again, he was amazed by elven craftsmanship. Not only did these little cakes heal injuries, they also completely refilled your hunger bar with a single bite. Perfect for traveling, or raiding, or running from fire-breathing lizards, Eric muttered to himself. If he'd had just one of these during his fight with the warg riders back in the ogre forest, things would have been different. He might have stood his ground, instead of running like a particularly cowardly squirrel. Unfortunately, these things were rare. A Glanir had only 3 pieces, and, seeing how much Eric liked them, gave them all to him. Lembas won't satisfy your appetite the way bread and meat do, a Glanir explained. But they'll keep you alive when it matters. Think of them as life-saving snacks. They're more than helpful, Eric said. Do you have more to sell? A Glanir shook his head apologetically. Sadly, no. We don't produce them in large quantities, and they're not something we sell. I only had a few for emergencies. Eric wasn't too disappointed. 3 was more than he expected, and each one was basically a portable potion plus meal. Without any way to brew potions yet, these were a godsend. Time passed strangely in the hidden valley. Days slipped by like mist over the mountains. It wasn't until Eric stood watching a waterfall that he realized he'd been here for a full week. It had been a wonderful stay, almost too peaceful. But it was time to move on. The next morning, he dressed in his travel gear, saddled his horse, and prepared to leave. You're leaving? A voice asked behind him. A Glanir again, as if drawn by fate. Time waits for no man or elf, Eric replied with a grin. I've got things to do, places to be. Then may your path be swift as the wind, a Glanir said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Thanks. Behind them, the elf who cared for the horses let out an audible sigh of relief. This horse had gone 7 days without food or water. No matter what he tried, hay, oats, elven apples, the beast refused to eat. He'd asked Eric about it multiple times, worried the animal was ill. Each time, Eric just waved it off like it wasn't a big deal. If the horse hadn't stayed perfectly healthy the whole time, the elf would have suspected Eric had some kind of grudge against it. Now he just concluded the horse was weird. Exceptionally weird. And probably magical. As he mounted, Eric turned to a Glanir one last time. A Glanir, if you ever find yourself passing between Weathertop and the last bridge, there's a castle nestled in the valley there. Drop by, and I'll return the hospitality with everything I've got. He meant it too. A Glanir had helped him out, shared valuable resources, and even gifted those precious lembas. Eric had wanted to give something in return, maybe a rare gem or artifact, but he hadn't packed anything fancy. Handing over a gold bar felt tacky. So it would have to wait for next time. One minor regret, he hadn't met Aragorn. The man's presence in the valley was still a secret. No one talked about it, and Eric wasn't about to ask and blow someone's cover. So be it. He'd come back another time. The journey called. Eric kicked his heels lightly and rode westward, leaving the valley behind. Useless, you're all completely useless. The roar shook the cave, echoing off the walls like thunder. At the center of the chamber, seated atop a throne-sized slab of stone, loomed the massive figure of the Orc King. A beast twice the size of a normal orc, and 10 times as angry. A single human, he bellowed. One human, and you couldn't kill him. The orc kneeling before him trembled. We ran into elves. And now he's staying in their lands. So why not ambush him somewhere without elves? What? The Orc King had already received fresh intel. From the west side of the ogre forest, scouts had reported something interesting. The humans' fortress, a heavily fortified castle, was empty. Since the humans' departure, there had been no smoke from the chimneys, no lights, no activity. Only the occasional clucking of livestock inside the walls. Some orcs even tried yelling insults at the gate and throwing rocks. No response. He's not home, the king growled. So burn his home down. And then wait inside. I want his head on a pike. Because if he couldn't beat the man in battle, he'd just beat his base instead. Chapter 27, Fear. That night, from the depths of the misty mountains, a sizable squad of orc cavalry thundered forth beneath the stars. They skirted around the elven valley, plunged through the forest of ogre, and galloped straight toward the wilderness beyond. Where they passed, birds burst from treetops in alarm and wild hares darted for cover. At that moment, Eric was still in the hidden valley. The thick forest cover obscured all movement from afar. Even the sharp-eyed elven sentries stationed at the border only noted that another small group of orcs had slipped out. Hardly alarming. Orc scouting parties were routine. This one didn't even appear to be heading toward the valley. If anything, it looked like they were taking a detour. So no one paid them much attention. But while the elves dismissed them, other eyes did not. In the wastelands, cloaked rangers watched from afar as shadowed figures moved across the plains. Something felt off. Perhaps something worth investigating. After several grueling days of nonstop marching, the orcs arrived at a lush region. Forests, flatlands, and a lake shimmering in the moonlight. That evening, the orc squad leader vaulted onto a massive boulder, gazing into the horizon. Beyond a shallow rise stood a solitary stone-walled fortress. Target in sight, he growled. Into the trees. Build the siege ladders. We strike tonight. Within the fortress walls, birds chirped, horses whinnied, pigs snorted. Not a single creature sensed what loomed just beyond the woods. Well, except for 2 horses in the stables. Brought in from the town of Bree, these native-bred steeds pawed anxiously at the ground, huffing and whining as if they knew something wicked was drawing near. No one came to calm them. No one was there. The only company they had were rows of silent, iron-headed golems with expressionless eyes, staring blankly at the horse's restless dance. One scratched its head. That morning, Eric had set off from the hidden valley in high spirits, thrilled about unlocking a new module. With dreams of testing his latest upgrades, he galloped home with glee, completely unaware of what was unfolding. That night, boom! The siege ladders slammed against the fortress walls with a dull crash and settled in place. The orcs roared and scrambled, upward with bloodlust in their eyes. The first orc to reach the top peered around. No guards on the towers, no archers in sight. With a gleeful cackle, he rushed to the gate controls and yanked down a lever. Ka-chunk! A small iron gate groaned open, revealing a narrow but tall entrance. One by one, the orcs poured in with their mounts. It was slow going, but inevitable. The livestock in the paddocks, cows, chickens, pigs, turned their heads and regarded the intruders with oddly intelligent calm. Seeing the animals, the first few orc riders grinned. So much fresh meat, just waiting to be carved. They raised their blades and prepared to charge the pen, already drooling at the thought of sizzling meat over a campfire. They never made it. Boom's boom. A low, grinding growl echoed through the fortress. Then crack. Pain split the lead orc's side. He soared through the air, howling along with his mount, before crashing outside the walls with a sickening crunch. Dead. From midair, he caught a glimpse of his mount, also airborne, before both of them slammed into the dirt outside the wall. Neither moved again. If you feel unloved, try picking a fight with a golem. You'll feel something, I promise. Eric Starfell. The iron golem's sudden appearance paralyzed the nearby orcs. They watched, wide-eyed, as their comrade was launched into the sky like a toy. Fight back, there's only one, the squad leader bellowed. Spurred by fury, the orc riders surged forward, snarling, blades raised. They piled onto the lone golem. To its credit, the golem fought back valiantly. Each swing of its iron arm sent another orc and wolf flying. But there were too many. They swarmed it, clung to its limbs, jabbed into its joints. Soon, the first hairline crack appeared in its arm. It's not invincible, the squad leader howled with triumph. Keep going, we'll crack it open. Hope bloomed. Until the earth shook again. This time louder. More rhythmic. Thom, thom, thom. The fortress shook. From every shadowed corner, behind the towers, beneath the keep, beside the stables, more giants emerged. 20 in total. All iron golems. Marching in unison, iron arms raised, eyes flaring. The slaughter began. Orcs were hurled into the air like broken dolls. Crimson stained the ground and arcs. Within seconds, the 100-strong company was shattered. The narrow gate that once granted access now became a death trap. Panic erupted. Out of the way. 2 orc riders scrambled for the exit, shoving, snarling, kicking. One of the panicked orcs was trampled and collapsed in the doorway, blocking it completely. Another, desperate to live, vaulted over the mess and fled into the night, never once looking back. Behind him, the chaos only grew. The orc squad leader stared at the madness with wide eyes. He shouted, trying to rally his men, but they were too far gone, scattered, broken, defeated. Fear had taken hold. These weren't enemies they could fight. These were not men. Not elves. Not beasts. They were machines of war. He spun his wolf mount and galloped toward the gate, shoving others aside. Move, moves. But the exit was jammed. His heart pounded as he watched his warriors get flung skyward like ragdolls. With a curse, he kicked his mount forward, knocking over any orc in his way. Out of my way. He finally reached the gate, only to see why the others were stuck. A fallen orc lay twisted at the threshold, blocking passage. You useless oaf, get him out of there. No one listened. The sound of another golem's approach was like a drumbeat of doom. With no time left, the commander leapt off his mount and squeezed through the gap, scraping armor and skin. As he tumbled to the outside, the eyes of his dying wolf glared up at him in betrayal. Then it was struck down beneath a golem's fist. The commander would live to tell the tale, to bring word back to the Orc King. And he would bring something else back with him. Terror. As he vanished into the darkness, only one thought burned behind his eyes. This was no ordinary keep. This was a fortress of dread. Meanwhile, Eric was still galloping home in high spirits, unaware of any of this. Then, out of nowhere, a flurry of notifications popped up over his vision. Reputation with Dunedain plus 50. Reputation with the Valley folks plus 50. Reputation with Bree region plus 30. Your name is spreading throughout the free realms. Hi. Eric blinked, bewildered, reins slack in his hands. What the hell happened while I was gone? Chapter 28, New Gear. From the valley to Eric's fortress, the straight-line distance was about 50 leagues, roughly 240 kilometers. With Eric riding full tilt, pushing both himself and his mount day and night without rest, it didn't take long. He'd left the valley at dawn, and by the time the sun began to dip the following day, he was already approaching his territory. Technically speaking, if he'd taken a direct route with 0 distractions, Eric could have made the trip in a single day. But that was a fantasy. The real world wasn't a loading screen. For starters, his path was anything but straight. He'd taken more detours than a drunk pigeon. And then there were the constant annoyances. Trees in the way, boulders blocking the trail, the occasional pit, and even the odd wandering orc squad popping out of nowhere. Like bad side quests. All of it added up. If only I had a max speed horse, Eric muttered under his breath. In MC terms, a maxed-out horse could hit 20 meters per second. If he had one of those beauties, he could gallop to the valley for breakfast and be back by lunchtime, easy. The steed he currently rode wasn't terrible, but it wasn't breaking any land speed records either. Still, there was no rush. A top-tier horse was only a matter of time. Even without using speed potions or enhancements, selectively breeding fast horses would eventually yield results. One generation at a time, good genes always rose to the top. As he approached the castle, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves began to fade. Eric pulled to a stop at the main gate. But before he could even dismount, his nose crinkled. What is that smell? It was sharp. Foul. A mix of crimson and rotting meat. And then he noticed it. The small iron side gate, usually locked tight, hanging wide open. And lying just outside it. An orc. Eric's expression darkened. He dismounted in an instant and rushed to the gate. With a sharp kick, he shoved aside the corpse slumped there and stepped through. Damn. The sight made his stomach clench. Bodies. Everywhere. Orc corpses, warg corpses, limbs, some charred, some crushed. The stone floor inside the walls was slick with drying stains. It was immediately clear what had happened. Eric broke into a run, heading straight for the livestock pens. Thankfully, nothing was missing. Idiots! You really thought attacking my home was a good idea. A quick count gave him a rough estimate. Over 200 corpses, orcs and wargs combined, were scattered around the courtyard like grotesque confetti. There were so many bodies, it was hard to find a place to step. And it wasn't just the ground. Several unlucky orcs had been launched onto the towers, their broken forms still hanging from the parapets like grim decorations. So that's where the reputation boost came from, Eric said dryly, opening his status screen. Reputation with Misty Mountain's orc tribe, -344, sworn enemy. Yeah, that tracked. A loud clunk drew his attention. A few of his iron golems were limping past, their once pristine bodies now crisscrossed with fractures. So he hadn't come through this entirely unscathed. Eric bent down, picking up a few iron ingots and a crushed red flower that had fallen during the chaos. He shook his head, then planted the flower near the gate in a small patch of grass. Even golems had health bars, and they'd bled for him.